Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. And today I'm going to give my review of Starrcade 1985. Starting off the evening, we go to our first match of the night. It is Crusher Khrushchev versus Sam Houston for the Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Championship. I thought it was a good matchup, back and forth matchup between both Crusher and Sam Houston, with Crusher keeping the pace of the match. But Crusher hits a devastating clothesline on Sam Houston, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time, new Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion, is Crusher Khrushchev. A couple things I'll say about this match is, number one, it was a really good matchup. It was a great opening matchup for Starrcade 1985, and Crusher Khrushchev. Crusher Khrushchev, after the match, towards the end of Starrcade, he had an interview backstage, and Crusher Khrushchev was actually Barry Darsow, if I'm not mistaken, which was kind of weird because obviously Crusher Khrushchev, and the way they were booking Crusher Khrushchev, he was obviously teaming up with the Koloffs and stuff like that, which is an underrated team, by the way. It was just kind of funny seeing that Crusher Khrushchev was Barry Darsow, in my honest, from what I've seen, it looked like Barry Darsow. So that was kind of funny to see. But Sam Houston, again, man, Sam Houston, underrated. He was a great talent, phenomenal wrestler. I feel like he didn't really get a fair shake in professional wrestling, in my honest opinion, because Sam Houston was definitely underrated. But hats off to Crusher Khrushchev for getting the win, and at that time becoming the new Mid-Atlantic Heavyweight Champion. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Manny Fernandez versus Abdullah the Butcher. Number one, I thought this was a great matchup, back and forth matchup between both Manny and Abdullah, with Manny keeping the pace of the match. And then Fernandez ultimately gets the finish in this matchup. A couple things I'll say about this match too, man, is that this match was absolutely brutal, man. These guys, every part of this match was just brutal, hands down. I mean, Manny Fernandez was busted wide open, Abdullah was busted wide open, and Abdullah the Butcher, man, to me, underrated. One of my all-time favorites. And every time you see Abdullah have a match, man, it was always just brutal. I mean, the stuff that he would do in those matches, the matches he had with, Bruiser Brody, Carlos Colon, and this match right here with Manny Fernandez at Starrcade 1985 was just, a definition, if you will, of how crazy Abdullah would get in these matches. And Abdullah wasn't a small guy. If you guys know who Abdullah the Butcher is, that guy was a unit. I mean, he's probably every bit of 400 pounds. And he can move in that ring very quickly, almost as if a light heavyweight in that ring. And every time he got in a match, to me, in my opinion as a fan, every time he got into a match with Abdullah, you're not going to leave on your own accord, that's for sure. I mean, Abdullah was in there to get the win. No matter how he did it or when he did it, he was going to get the win. But unfortunately, he did not get the win in that matchup. So again, hats off to Manny Fernandez for getting the win in that match. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Ron Bass versus Black Bart in a Texas Bull Rope match. I thought this was a great match as well. Back and forth matchup between both Ron Bass and Black Bart, with Ron Bass keeping the pace of the match. But Ron Bass ultimately gets the win. Hats off to Ron Bass for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match, kind of an impromptu match, if you will. It is James J. Dillon versus Ron Bass in another Texas Bull Rope match, if you will, or to me, it really wasn't a bull rope match, but that's about how they were booking the matchup. It was an okay matchup. J.J. Dillon was keeping the pace of the match due to the fact that Ron Bass just went through a great matchup with Black Bart. So J.J. Dillon was keeping the pace of the match. Black Bart comes out, hits a pile driver on Ron Bass, and your winner of the match is James J. Dillon. Again, hats off to James J. Dillon for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Superstar Billy Graham versus the Barbarian in an arm wrestling matchup. To me, this really wasn't a matchup. It was an okay arm wrestling match, if you will. But Graham won the match by disqualification. So, again, hats off to Superstar Billy Graham for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is Terry Taylor versus Buddy Landel for the NWA National Heavyweight Championship. I thought it was a good matchup, back and forth matchup between both Taylor and Landel, with Landel keeping the pace of the match. Taylor then goes for a suplex, but Landel hits a roll-up instead, pins Taylor for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time, new NWA National Heavyweight Champion is Buddy Landel. Hats off to Buddy Landel for getting the win in this matchup, and at that time becoming the new NWA National Heavyweight Champion. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night as well. It is the Minnesota Wrecking Crew versus Billy Jack Haynes and Wahoo McDaniel for the NWA National Tag Team Championships. I thought this match was a really good matchup too. It was a back and forth matchup between both teams, with Wahoo and Haynes keeping the pace of the match. But the Minnesota Wrecking Crew ultimately get the win in this matchup. A couple things I'll say about this match quickly as well, man, is the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. Ole Anderson, Arn Anderson, phenomenal tag team. Phenomenal tag team, obviously later on being a part of the Four Horsemen. And Wahoo McDaniel, again, underrated. Billy Jack Haynes, underrated. You know, these two teams really brought it in this matchup, man, but the Minnesota Wrecking Crew got the best of Wahoo McDaniel and Jack Haynes. So, again, hats off to the Minnesota Wrecking Crew for getting a win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night, and to me, one of the matches of the night on this card, besides the main event, it is Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard in a steel cage match / I Quit, if you will. This match was great. It was a back and forth matchup between Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard, with Tully keeping the pace of the match. But Magnum ultimately gets Tully Blanchard to say I quit, and your winner of the match is Magnum TA. Couple things I'll say about this match too as well, man. Magnum TA, phenomenal talent, and honestly at that time they were building Magnum TA to be the next Ric Flair. They were building him to be the next Hulk Hogan, if you will, of NWA. They were really trying to hype him up to be the next heavyweight champion. Unfortunately, a couple years down the road, he ended up getting into a really, really bad car accident, which pretty much ended his in-ring career since that accident. But, you know, obviously one phenomenal talent, man. Phenomenal talent. And this match was just brutal, man. I mean, both Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard were busted wide open in this matchup. And both Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard, they brought it in this matchup, hands down. It's probably one of the best matches of Starrcade 1985, hands down. So hats off to Magnum TA for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Midnight Express versus Jimmy Valiant and Miss Atlanta in a street fight. I thought it was an okay matchup, back and forth matchup between both Midnight Express, Jimmy Valiant, and Miss Atlanta. But Jimmy Valiant and Miss Atlanta were keeping the pace of the match, and your winners of the match are Jimmy Valiant and Miss Atlanta. Hats off to Jimmy Valiant and Miss Atlanta for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the Rock and Roll Express versus Ivan and Nikita Koloff for the NWA Tag Team Championships in a steel cage matchup. I thought this was a great matchup too, man. This is a back and forth matchup between both Rock and Roll Express and the Koloffs, with Rock and Roll keeping the pace of the match. And your winners of the match are the Rock and Roll Express. Again, phenomenal tag team matchup, man. The NWA tag team division was definitely underrated back then. They had some phenomenal tag teams. You know, Rock and Roll Express. I mean, what more can I say about, you know, Rock and Roll Express, man? Phenomenal tag team. The Koloffs, again, phenomenal tag team as well. So, hats off to the Rock and Roll Express for getting a win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of Starrcade 1985. It is Dusty Rhodes versus Ric Flair for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. The match itself, great matchup. A lot of history between both Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair, with Dusty Rhodes keeping the pace of the match. But Dusty ultimately hits a roll-up on Ric Flair, pins Flair for the 3, and your winner of the match, and at that time new NWA World Heavyweight Champion, is the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. Again, phenomenal matchup, man. As far as Starrcade 1985, man, there was a lot of really good matches on this card. I mean, from Abdullah the Butcher and Manny Fernandez, which I thought was a phenomenal matchup. Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard in an I Quit steel cage match. Absolutely phenomenal, man. To me, that was the match of the night besides the main event. And I'm not taking anything away from Rock and Roll Express versus the Koloffs, because I thought that was a great tag team matchup. But man, that Magnum TA versus Tully Blanchard match to me was the match of the night of Starrcade 1985, hands down, besides Dusty versus Flair, hands down. As far as a rating for Starrcade 1985, you guys know by now, I always give these pay-per-views a rating from 1 out of 10. I'm going to give Starrcade 1985, to me, a solid 8, man. I think it was a really good Starrcade. Now, I'm not sitting here saying it's the best Starrcade, but the matches for me, in my opinion, that I saw on Starrcade 1985 deserves an 8 for me. The I Quit match was a phenomenal matchup, a synonymous match for the early NWA era in WCW. That match is always going to be known. One of Tully Blanchard's most famous matches of all time. And obviously Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair. I mean, the history and the lineage and the rivalry, if you will, between Dusty and Flair has gone on for many years, man. And it's just a great story. I mean, you have Dusty Rhodes, you know, the blue-collar, you know, wrestler, you know, the people's champ, if you will. And you got Ric Flair, which is about, you know, the limousine riding, jet flying, you know, that's what Flair was all about. Dusty Rhodes was more for the people, man. Dusty Rhodes represented the people. And everybody, I mean, wrestling fan or not a wrestling fan, everybody knows about Dusty Rhodes. And 9 times out of 10, a lot of people are going to be pulling for Dusty to get the win. Myself included. I was still a humongous Dusty Rhodes fan. There would never be another Dusty Rhodes in this business, ever. Hands down. Hands down. But as far as Starrcade 1985, I'm going to have to give this a solid 8, man. But this is my review of Starrcade 1985. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classy.